So again, my name is Jim Halloran. If you haven't been with me before, the idea today is just to watch somebody paint and paint along if you like. I'm going to be doing flowers in watercolor. So let me flip it around so that you can see everything. Okay. So today, like every time we look at a painting and start a painting, we're going to try to do the impossible, which is to try to take something from life and transfer it into pigment and line and shape and all that kind of magic that happens when you create an artwork. So my job here is to try to make it seem a little bit more approachable, that it's not impossible, and that the process is actually really fun. That's why we do it, right? Because it's fun. We want to learn how to do it, but it's also a lot of fun along the way. So I grabbed this photo online from a website called Unsplash, where it's royalty-free images made by artists, which is really cool. They allow you to paint from their work. So it's a photograph of flowers. Painting flowers from life is probably your best bet. I like watercolor for that reason, because I've painted flowers before in oil, but what happens if it takes more than one day to paint a flower painting? If you're using live flowers, well, the flowers change from day to day. You know, they start to open up and then they start to wilt. So it's kind of a race against the clock when you're painting flowers. So that's why I chose watercolor today. Watercolor is a great medium for painting flowers because flowers are loose, they're alive, they're organic, they're soft. Those are all words that I could use to describe watercolor and watercolor techniques too. So I purposely chose a background here that's white, so that we can pretty much leave the white of the paper and not have to worry about that. If you look up like flower photography, oftentimes there's a chiaroscuro background, meaning there's a real high contrast between dark and the bright flowers. But if you're doing that with watercolor, that means you're painting a lot of background. And I wanted us to not worry about the background today, because if this was a really dark background, you'd have to worry about that to make these flowers come out. But you could see here, the contrast is the color against the white background. So that's pretty nice and easy to work with. And you can see I just have a little bit of a foreground here on the bottom. And that's the table that it's sitting on, which is actually kind of like a bench. So it has some texture on it too. So that's my photograph. You could tell I spent a lot of time thinking about the photograph and searching for an appropriate photograph. If you were to do this at home, you know, fresh flowers with a white background, put it against a white wall and a light source, either it be natural light or just like a desk lamp would work too. Because you can see here, the light on the right side is a little bit lighter here, and there's a little bit of shadow on the left. So that helps. That's going to help pull those flowers out of this totally white background. Okay, so there's my paper. It's just general watercolor paper, nothing fancy today. Sometimes I use hot press paper, which is like the fancy paper that's $2 a sheet. That allows your watercolors to dry really fast. But today I'm just using regular like all-purpose watercolor paper, very inexpensive. I think it's the Canson Biggie pad where you get 100 sheets for like 15 bucks, so it's cheap. And then you can see here, I taped the background. That's important to me because I think, you know, whether you like it or not, presentation has a lot to do with how somebody views your artwork. So if it's neatly presented, even if there's all this chaos in here, you know, and mine is going to be filled with mistakes, but a nice clean background, that's one thing, you know, a little bit of perfect you get for free if I peel this off and don't tear the paper, which I have to hope for. Just as a note, I put the tape on my pant leg just to get some of that stickiness off, because I want this to be able to peel off kind of easily without destroying the paper. That's just regular masking tape. And then I'll show you my materials here. I have just a general watercolor set, nothing fancy. Watercolor, I feel like, unlike sometimes oils and acrylics, cheap is kind of okay because all you really need is water and color. So a lot of times that's what you'll get. This is like a set made by a company called Faber-Castell, and it's a children's set that also works for adults. So I like it for that reason. We use this for most of our programs when I teach watercolor. And these little pieces pop out. So if you run out of a color, like I'm running out of blue, probably because the kid who used this painted the whole background blue. A lot of times we paint sky blue for landscapes. That's one that we run out of first, but you can replace it with a new color, which is really nice. And this is a pan set. Sometimes watercolors come in tubes too. It's a little more expensive, a little nicer. You will feel, the quality too. If you pay a little bit more, you get nicer paints. But this will work fine for today. I have my pencil. I'm going to be using a pencil for sketching. And then I have a little bowl of water, paper towels, and then you can see I have a lot of brushes. But honestly, I'm going to be using this brush a lot. I tend to use kind of a medium-sized brush for most of it. I might use a bigger brush in an area just to show you some wet on wet paint, and then maybe get a mini brush. But typically I use one brush for the most part of a painting. So that's why if you get a little travel pan set of watercolors, it usually just comes with one brush and you could do a lot with it. And like I said, background's white, so we don't have to paint a whole lot of background. That's where bigger brushes would help. Okay, so like I said, we're going to try the impossible today. And I feel like I usually set us up in that way just to keep our expectations here on Earth, because painting is hard, right? But that's why we do it. It's hard, but it's fun. And we learn as we go. So I would say 10 years ago, I didn't even know how to start a watercolor painting. I came to watercolor very late. Watercolor can be intimidating for those that are used to acrylic and oil, because we can just add layer upon layer to get it right. Watercolor takes a freer spirit. You have to let things go with watercolor and just kind of put something down and leave it, which can be hard for some of us. Some of our perfectionist tendencies don't want to do that. We want to fuss with something till it feels perfect to us. So that's why I say we're going to try the impossible today. And at the end, you will have something you may not love, but you probably will like, and there will be parts of it that you love. I promise you that. And it's fun to paint all together. So enough talk. Let me get started. Here is just, they call this kind of the impossible white background, because it's like, where do you start? Nothing's more intimidating than a blank canvas. Sometimes with oil and acrylic, I put color all over the canvas just to get something down. It feels less intimidating, right? Because we have this pristine white background, but we have to start somewhere. Usually your first line is an absolute mistake, and that's okay. But I want to try to break down something like this. It's super complicated. If we count flowers here, there's probably 30 little flowers. I don't want to do that. I want to start from the big and then work my way up to the small, if I even get there. So what does that mean? I need to draw some basic shapes. So I kind of need to just find my shapes here on the paper. Maybe I'll start with the ground, okay? It's sometimes easiest just to draw a line. And you can see it's a light line. With watercolor, if you draw too dark, you tend to see your lines through the watercolor paint. So just keep that in mind. I'm even going a little darker than maybe I'd go if it were just me doing something for myself, but it has to show up on video too. Okay, see how I drew that in? The lines are parallel with the tape. It just gives me something to work with, some place to start. Now remember that could be a whole lot of wrong, but at this step, doesn't matter. It's okay. Now, before I draw in the jar here, the vase, I need to kind of see where it is on the image. So let me see where it is positioned in this composition. You can see I'm going to take the tip of the pencil and match it with the left side of the screen. Take my finger, physically measure it. It's just about center. It's slightly off center. So in that sense, if I just sketch this thing in, now I can kind of measure it slightly off center. Look at it, it's curving this way. It's okay. See how I just sketch that in? Why do I like sketching? Well, I don't like to draw really hard lines. The younger the child, the more the more they'll grab their pencil and they'll draw a definite, confident line. That's why I love children and teaching art to them, because they're so confident it's right. Even though that it's wrong, but it's that confidence that in a way makes them more right than you and I that are very timid. But with this, when I sketch, it's a little more comforting because I'm not committing to like one line here, right? Like a child, I'm committing to a lot of little wrong lines that together somehow make something a little bit more right, if that makes sense. So see, I sketched that, and if that takes you a long time, so be it. But keep it kind of loose. I keep it loose because it's more forgiving. You set your own standard for how tight you want to be. So if you start pulling out the compass and the rulers right off the bat, it's a long way to go. You know, sometimes that's the hardest student to teach, that want to get things perfect from the start, because this is just a guideline. We're going to cover this thing with paint anyway. Okay, so now the flowers, right? Now, part of me, right, wants to just start to draw individual flowers, which is going to take me into drawing individual petals, which is going to take me into some place I don't want to be this early, which is kind of lost, right? I'm going to be worried about petals instead of the big picture. This takes time to learn these instincts, right? But it's hardwired in my brain because I've been teaching for a while, that you just want to get kind of the shape. Just get that general shape. Try to see this as a shape. It's almost like a fan shape if you look at it. It's rounded here, right? And a little bit more pointed on the bottom. Look at that. Now I can even find an angle, which is nice. See that angle, right? And I can kind of match it up here. I'm seeing through all the detail. Look at that. Not bad. And then down here, you know, it kind of breaks apart a little bit. But see how I broke down this into simpler shapes? Now, if you want, we can talk a little bit about proportion, right? Does this shape match up with this shape? Are they proportionate to the photo? Well, let's see. I can actually physically measure like the size of this thing, the length. Okay, the vase is taller. Aha, mine not so much. See how I changed that shape? Now I can kind of measure. Still a little off. Excuse me. There we go. So see how it gets me in the ballpark? See how I had it so tall and I adjusted it there. I'm actually going to get a kneadable eraser. That's a little bit, a little more forgiving for the paper. If you don't have a kneadable eraser, it's kind of soft. I'll show you here. But it's kind of soft, you need it. And it's a little less abrasive than a pencil eraser. See, it just takes all that off. Now, was that important to fuss over? I mean, honestly, probably not too much. It would change the shape in the sense that it would make the jar look smaller in proportion to some of these flowers. But in the end, we're not going to have this photo. We just have the flowers. So you can kind of decide that. Okay, so now I can kind of sketch in some of the flower shapes too. You can see it, it's a sketchy mess, but from my sketching is going to emerge some shapes, some smaller shapes. And then I have, gosh, do I even want to draw these little flowers here? I'm not sure. And that line on top, it's a little too hard. Let's just soften that up. But I hope you take my point that I was able to find a shape in there. There's a little flower up here too. Maybe I'll draw some of those flowers. And I'm already feeling intimidated, right? Getting in some of those little shapes. So let me do a zoom in. See how messy that is, right? But see, what I try to do is go from the simple to the more detailed. And some of your flowers will be, you know, wrong size, wrong shape, but they're flowers. Flowers are forgiving in that sense, right? This isn't portraiture where, you know, you have to make a person look like a person, right? Flowers are a bit more forgiving. The hard part about flowers is to get them to feel soft like flowers, right? Oftentimes I overwork flowers and I kind of make them a little too hard, a little too perfect, when flowers should feel like the wind were to blow, they'd move on your page. I'm gonna find the center of that flower too. That's important. Anything, just something to hold on to. Okay, now there's water here. Kind of see that. Let me put that in. That little line's important. I'm going to erase the line down here. My line is crooked, which is making the whole thing feel a little uncenter. There we go. Filled with mistakes, right? Okay. Now there's all the leaves here. Part of me, this is where, as a watercolor artist, I'm not as confident because I'm not sure how much I should draw in, how much I should just let the paint kind of take over. So I did a little bit of sketching in there. The worst thing to do is have just too many lines to fill in, because then it just kind of kills the spontaneity of the way the watercolor just kind of lays down on paper and just flows, right? We want it to flow. Okay, so in terms of adding color, right, I can kind of make an assessment here, like, am I good with my drawing? I think so. I can maybe just take off some of those lines just to not have so many scribbles underneath, but I think I have enough here to take it forward. That's all it is. It's just a guideline. So the rest of the time is filling in color. And it's a challenge. I find it a challenge even to where to start. With oil and acrylic, I typically go dark to light. With watercolor, it's sometimes a buildup where you start with washes, right? You start to get on lighter colors first, and you start to build to the darker colors. So I've done it both ways. My brain is hardwired to go dark to light, so sometimes I have issues doing it any other way. So what I'll probably do is show a couple different methods as I go, each probably imperfect. And that's why I always preface it with, I'm new to watercolor, so I'm learning too. Okay, so what I'm thinking is I have this gorgeous kind of yellow coming through here. I might just do a wash of yellow just to kind of fill this in. And so what I'm going to do is start to go from the general, which is just kind of a general color, a blob, right? These three flowers really relate to one another, and then slowly pull out individual petals. Instead of going in and painting one at a time, right? Trying to find the exact value of how dark or light it is. So let me bring you to my palette. Finally, we paint. So I have a yellow here, and I have an orange, and then I have these yellow flowers here, which to me is like a yellow orange, right? I'm gonna go and mix a little bit of these two together. What's nice is you have a little pan here on this set. So watercolor is just water and pigment, which is just this dried little pad here. And then here's some orange. And you can mix up a color. It warms it up. That's a gorgeous color here. Okay, add a little water. Like any material, in the beginning, the materials control you. And as you paint, you get a little more confident. You get more control of the materials. Even within one setting, I think I'm going to be more confident. By the end of this thing, my brush is going to be moving really quickly. Whereas in the beginning, I'm just kind of putting down color and letting it sit, and I'm moving a little slower. I tend to be a little bit more tentative in the beginning. Okay, filling that in. See what I did there? And I absolutely love these little drips here, because that's the pigment that will stick on the bottom. But I just did a kind of a wash of that color. We're going to start there. Kind of just massaging the shape, right? Just kind of finding the edges, right? I tried to make it loose and organic. Certainly didn't count any petals, and just filled that in. It's one of many layers, guys. So unlike other paints where you could, in a sense, erase by putting layer upon layer upon layer, if you'd kind of tread lightly and just put a soft wash on here. There's nothing here that can't be like adjusted in a later step, right? So I got that color down. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry for a little bit. And what I'd like to do now is maybe get in, I'm thinking getting in some of these pinks here, all these pinks here, and put them on. So again, I get to look at color. There is no white, so to make something a light pink, you have to use a little water. Here's a beautiful kind of magenta color. Now, the less water I have, the darker the pigment, and the more water I have, the lighter it is. So I tend to add a little bit of more water in the beginning. Now let's see how that works. Just to get in some of these colors. Now that white background is really helpful for me because I don't have to worry about what's behind it. See how I'm just filling in different spots? I think I'm going to be able to come in later and fill in some more detail. But I'm just getting some color down, coming up right up against that yellow. It's almost abstract. See how loose I'm trying to be? That's where I'm learning, right? That's where I'm a student, is how to be loose. I had a teacher, she would tell me, every artist wants to be loose. And it's hard to do because in the beginning as students, we want control and we tend to move slow and tight. But with flowers, just be loose. I didn't count how many flowers there were. It doesn't matter, honestly. It's more about the feeling that there are flowers there. So there's nothing there, like I said, that I can't change later. I'm just getting down just some light color, kind of blocking it in. And then we're going to be able to make some adjustments in a bit. So this is different. This is a different approach from how I've painted before. Sometimes I'll be a little bit more tight, getting in those shapes. If this were maybe even a landscape, I'd probably be a little bit more higher contrast, a little darker color. But these are flowers, so I'm just trying to keep it loose. I'm gonna be able to come in and get in a lot of that green, which is gonna be a little bit harder than the flowers. Harder in the sense those edges are gonna be a little more defined to get those stems in. Okay, not a bad start. I'm noticing there's a little bit of yellow up here. Let me get in some of that. A little too much water, but that's okay. Oftentimes, the parts of the watercolor I like the most are the kind of more spontaneous, loose bits where the water just kind of took over, took it out of my hands. All right, I have that flower in too. So far, so good. I'm avoiding painting in here because I want to let it dry a little bit before I go a little darker. Okay, so I'm almost ready. I'm almost ready for the leaves. However, unlike the white background, that's just pretty much all white, you can see there's a darker tone in here. Do you see this green gray in here and here? I actually think it's beneficial to get that in first before I paint in all those leaves. So let me get in a green gray. How do we make green gray? Well, let's try green and black. That might work. Honestly, let's avoid black. Let's do green and brown. Green and something dark. So here's my green. Put in my little pan here. Let's do brown. Why not black? Well, black, I don't know. I don't even think I should have a black pan here because black isn't really a color. It's like white, right? It's kind of a color assistant. And that's when you want to make something really, really dark. So I think maybe like an indigo blue, I could add a little black to it, to deepen it. Maybe some of this green here. But this is so light. It's gray green. So what I'm going to do is just put kind of a line of paint here. Notice my brush stroke. I just went straight across. And then I'm going to add a little water on the bottom just to lighten it up. Now, it's a little too dark on the bottom for me. That's actually one of the really bright spots of the painting. So here's Here's a wet towel. Maybe I'll just dab that. Just pull off some of that pigment. Is that against the rules? I don't think so, right? Sometimes I'm a sculptor when it comes to painting, and as you paint, you get more confident that, hey, I don't want you to do that paint, so I'm gonna make you do what I want you to do. Are you physically scraping off paint in this sense, taking water, removing it. Okay, now up here, I actually see some of this gray blue kind of reflected into the water. So let me take my green with brown. Let me add a touch of blue. Here, I'll show you. I'm going to go into this new pan here. So I have that green and brown, and then I added a touch of that. It's like an ultramarine blue. Let me add that in. Oh, too light. And notice here, I went off the side of the page right here. Hey, that's okay. Just dab it. That's actually quite nice the way that dried. Let me just darken the top a little bit. And look at those drips. Yeah, drips are fun. Maybe I'll just bring that into. So see how loose it is? If I have one point today, that's what I would say, is try to keep it loose when you're painting flowers. Okay, now that I have this color, I really love this color. It's green, brown, and blue. So now I'm gonna go and fill this in. You can see there's a shadow. There's a shadow underneath this. Maybe I'll just fill that in. I try to keep it straight, but hey, guess what? It's not perfect. Let me just drag across. And it's a mess, right? But it's a pretty mess. Right? It's clumsy. Painting is so clumsy, everybody. Like, we see a lot of paintings and it's so tight. And you're just like baffled. How is it so tight? But it starts with just kind of these clumsy brush strokes, and then usually there's some tightening up, but it's kind of a magic act too. Things are usually not as tight as you think. Now here, look at how this bumps up this brush stroke. It's kind of clumsy. And this should be rounded. It should be convex, not concave. So maybe I'll try to lighten that up a little bit. There's only so much I could do, right, with wet paint. And let me just dab that a little bit, soften that edge, and poof, right? Maybe if I just go over this again, bring that edge back. There it is. Okay. Now, what's happening? The paper didn't like that. The paper knew I was getting a little fussy, and it started to kind of pill up and break up a little bit. Too much water and paper, and it starts to fall apart. So keep that in mind. Your paper doesn't want you to be fussy either. Have a little water on the brush there. There we go. Okay, and then dark down here. So remember I said don't use black? Well, hey, let's use a little black with blue. There's probably some purists that are like, don't do it. But I don't have anything too dark. It's mostly blue, so just keep that in mind. It's actually more blue than I even see in the photo, but it's a beautiful color. Beautiful indigo. There's some green in there too. It looks like almost a little moss was growing on that thing. Let me just do a swipe. I might even let that dry. I'll go over it again when it's completely dry with a dry brush technique. Just kind of drag some dry black, dark blue paint over on top of it. Okay, see how we're slowly getting structure? Now this edge here got a little hard. Let a little water. Soften it up a little bit. Not bad. We'll do a close-up just to show you it's messy. All right. I think a couple different routes to take. I can add some of the green leaves in. Yeah, let's add the green leaves in. I feel like before I go to the next level of detail in these flowers, I should probably just block everything in. So that's a great organic green. It actually looks like watercolor when you get up close, the way the pigment is. So to get that dark, I'm going to use a little less water and more paint. So I'm going to take my green here, put that down, and maybe get a touch of blue. Right, blue and green makes a dark green, and then maybe a little brown. Give it an earthy kind of color. Let's see. All kinds of weird stuff happens here because there's a highlight here on the glass. Kind of want to preserve that, but maybe I can use some white paint. All right, see what I did? This is what I mean by less water, more pigment. See how opaque that is? Let me get one here. I'm trying to kind of do it with one stroke. Best stroke of the day, everybody, right? That one and that one. Maybe just hit it just there, just because I can't leave things alone. Who can? Okay, so I'm trying to do all this kind of like in one stroke, right? Just try to get the shape. Easier said than done, but the brush is about the same size as some of these leaves. I'm gonna get a little black paint into this green, black and blue. Because here it's so dark. This leaf is so dark here. Maybe just leave it like that. There's more stuff going on. There's a little leaf down here. There's something else going here. There's a little stem. Maybe I'll put the stem in. I've already gotten too detailed. Maybe get some of that dark going on here. Try to keep it loose. I'll come back around for some of that. But that's like almost a different technique. I'm a less disciplined watercolor painter, so part of me is questioning, was like, no, should I have done that light first, like the flowers? But the leaves kind of need to be hard compared to the flowers, so I'm okay with that. Okay, now what I'd like to do is start to pull out some definition in some of these flowers. So, I have the light, right? I just blocked in a shape. So now what I think I need to do is start to get some of those darker oranges. So let's see how dark it is here. Let me add a layer of a darker warm orange on this left flower. So I think I get to be a little bit more orange. Here's some orange. Typically, if you're looking at shadows are cooler. So if you add something cool to it, like a cool color, like even a blue, right? It makes kind of a darker color. It will feel like it's behind my star of the show, right? This flower here. So I added some of that orange and yellow and a little bit of a little blue in there. Let's see. As a shadow. that good? I don't know. It looks brown to me, but maybe I'll add a little more orange. Added a little bit more orange, and then I'm gonna get some of the shadow on the left side, or the right side, excuse me. A little better. But what's nice, let me put a little more orange in the center here. What's nice is colors mix well together. And watercolor, if you can let it go for a little bit and just let it dry, it tends to dry kind of nice. It's okay. So the center of this one is a bit more orange too. So let me get a little water. And just see how I'll make kind of like radial brush strokes, just kind of out from the center. Add another layer. Okay. Right, just remember this is an imperfect art, right? It's a mess. But watercolor, you know, there's nothing more. Anybody who has who's ever had a basement flood, right? Everybody knows there's nothing more chaotic than water, right? So this is water and pigment, so it's the nature of the beast. But look at this. Look at how that dried, this flower up here. I love that. Inspiring to me. Could not do that with oil or acrylic, so there's pros and cons. But you tend to give up some control with watercolor, and that's my point here. Okay, I think I'm ready to move on and get some of the darks into some of these flowers here. So some darker pink. So let me go and move my brush here, add a little purple. Okay, let me pull out some darks. How do you make a painting dynamic? Well, it's a mix of light and dark and warm and cool. So what am I doing here? Well, I have a very light, warm color here. And I added some bluish purple to it, right? So it's cooler and darker. And now all of a sudden it's going to become a more dynamic and therefore interesting painting because I have some variety. Okay, the flowers here are very light, so I don't want to overdo it. If everything is like treated, if every petal is treated the same, every flower the same, it gets boring. Nature is not boring. All right. I'm almost close to the centers here, but the centers, they're going to be solid, a little bit more of a solid object. And if I do wet on wet right now, it might bleed a little bit, meaning that the color will kind of blend in together and it will just be fuzzy. I don't want it to be fuzzy. But this flower here is pretty dry. So I'm going to get black and brown. Mix those two together. I have a light brown, like a burnt sienna. I don't have a dark brown, so that's where the black helps. But this is dry, so do a little detail. Try to get that dark in there. Now I had one shot at that. If that comes out too big, too small is a little better. I can make it bigger, but you just kind of put it down and leave it. Now the paper there, it actually feels kind of dry. Yep, okay. I can get some of that dark in here. Some of that dark center. And wow, that flower came to life with that dark center. Now, it's not dark everywhere, so let me lighten up the paint a little bit. This is a dry brush, everybody. Look how dry that is. And why is it dry? Well, I want to be able to show some of that kind of yellow showing through in some of those spots. There's like actual pollen, it looks like. See? If it were wet, that would not work. I was able to get kind of a dry effect. Now I have those little spots in there. Very nice. Okay. Now, I think I'm going to move to some of the green. Part of me wants to clean up these petals. I have petals here and petals here, but look at here. I'm missing some petals, and I think I need to paint around the flower to get them. So I think right now I'm going to work on the top, some green. Thin brush, right? This brush I can get to a nice point. I'm going to take some green and black. You could also take green if you have a dark brown, mix that in. Okay, just to show you what I'm doing here. Green and black. And what I can do is see the bottom of the flower. And then there's going to be a line. Let's see how good I am at this. I'm going to try to make a line. Ooh, that's hard. Here, it's a little bit more of a blob. I like blobs better. Blobs don't have to be so perfect. It's sometimes easier just to make a quick motion to get a straight line, because if I go slow, my hand shakes. But look, shaky hands are okay. Why? Because, well, nature is shaky. It's organic, it's messy. There aren't so many perfectly straight lines. Okay, see what I'm doing? There's like all these almost like zigzag lines here. Let me zoom in. See what a mess that is? In a good way. Let's see if I can get away with. I loosened up as I started working. In the beginning, I was so tentative. I might be able to go in with a little bit of a wash when that dries too. Okay, here, there's a stem here. And then there we go. I'm going to try to do a straight line. 1, 2, 3. It's okay. Yeah, I missed it. But hey, that works. If I say it's loose, right? It gets to be loose. Now I have that kind of beautiful green. And I'm going to show you here. The dark green defines the right side of this flower. So let's see if I can do that. Might be able to get a petal out of it. Right? All of a sudden I pulled a petal out. Now here's one too. See how like imperfect it is? That's the trick, everybody. If you go too tight, you're stuck. If you keep it loose, you're allowed to be loose, right? You set that standard. But it takes practice. And every painting that you kind of practice this on, it gets easier, it gets better. Now the left side of my flower, I don't have it. So I think I might use maybe a dark brown orange. Try to bring out some of the petals on that side. I can't erase, right? There's some mistakes there I have to live with. I wish it were lighter, but that helped a little bit. Same thing here. Make that a little darker. Okay, not terrible. I'll see how I'm getting fussy and working in these details now. But I kind of have permission to because there's not much left to go, honestly. I added some color up here. I noticed there was some yellow that I'd not seen before. And it's because I trained my brain to not see detail. So I'm going back in and adding some yellow into, my forest of flowers here. But it's all pretty dry, so that's nice. So, 10 years ago, I could not do this. I would have been measuring petals. And since I've painted with watercolor, it's allowed me to loosen up in some of my other work, like acrylic and oil. Because when I look at a painting, it's often the more loose, spontaneous brushstrokes that I'm really drawn to, because those are the ones I can't do. Okay, this flower. Oh, just made a big streak going across here. It's okay. Let it go. I'm gonna put some more of a green up there, right up against that dark, because that's what I see. Okay. All right, now I'll do a second pass on the glass here. I'm going to make it darker on the left side. I can see it. I can see a nice line here that will help pull out that shape. And then there's another line here, but it has a little more yellow in it. Nice thing about watercolor is my paint is dried, but I just had a little bit of water. Here's my gray blue. Let me put in a little bit of a line there. Straight lines are so hard. Okay, now I'm gonna add a little green in here on the right side. But even my lines, I kept it a little sketchy. And then there's some kind of lines going across. Just going from left to right. Maybe it's a little dark here. See how I'm getting a little more detailed now? And the bottom certainly is dark. Having a little shadow under your object, man, that goes a long way because it anchors it. Anchors it to the ground. See that dark? Let me add a little dark line there. And then I'm going back in second pass, adding some dark on my leaves. It's another layer. It's all layers. If you look up artists on YouTube, they sometimes get it right in one pass, but the rest of us, you kind of have to carve it out little by little. You're excavating an artwork from nothing, and it's built on mistakes. See, I darkened it here a little bit. Okay, remember earlier on I said I was going to use a dry brush technique. So I'm going to mix this right into that black paint. Stick it in the blue, so it's a black blue. I have it on the brush, hardly any water, just enough to get it off that little pan. Oh, that's a mistake. Oh well. My hand has a mind of its own. Okay, so what I'm going to do is drag this across, and I want a dry technique because I don't want it to have total coverage. I want it to be kind of scratchy. And then maybe go and do some lines in here. Okay, kind of worked. I wanted a little bit more of that light to show through. So there's a little water just to lighten up that side. That will look nice when I take that tape off. So like many of you, like the mistakes are killing me. They're haunting me. They're like pulling me in, right? Where I just want to obsess about it. But letting it go in watercolor helps so much, because sometimes a simpler kind of approach just it creates a more like pleasing and satisfying artwork, especially if you let it dry. All this mess here, I did not like that when I put it down, but you know, it's kind of working and it's not bad. And then next time I might think maybe I'll add less blue and more orange to get that effect. But that's okay. You know, the worst thing is just to keep fussing and fussing and fussing till the paper tears and you make a muddy mess. So just learning to live with the mistakes here, and try to see the big picture rather than the small details. You know, that's really freeing. And watercolor has that effect on me. So it's just something I'm practicing too. So just don't think I'm not seeing all my mistakes, because I am. And we all have different standards. You know, I've been painting a long time. So a seasoned artist will see the little things as big, you know, whereas a beginning student, you know, just trying to get to the basics. That's okay. Let's see where we're at. 11:22. This one went pretty quick. Well, I think, you know, it's a little early. This went fast. Watercolor sometimes goes fast. I can do another mini one if you guys are up for it. Let me pull off, let's see. We're not going to get too much magic from the top of this paper because it's all white to begin with. I'm happy it's not tearing. Really the bottom here. It's the opposite. I think this one's funny. It made it look like a floating shell. That's kind of strange. So we that effect I wanted is lost here. Now I'm thinking I should have painted a gray everywhere and then peeled it off. So live and learn. This one, yeah, that frame around it is kind of strange. So I think honestly I'd just take a paper cutter and cut right up or around it maybe a little bit. So let me see. Let me pull up some other flowers. I'll do another quick little flower demo so we have a little extra time together. So what will be fun about this is part 2. So when Nick edits this, he can have a mini one in here. So I'll just go right into it. But this is a time limit. We have about a half hour to do more work, right? In a smaller amount of space. So let's see. I'm gonna basically do my sketching. So you have to start somewhere, right? And what I wanna do is break these into blobs. So I'm gonna keep it scratchy and zigzag, right? Because that's a blob of flowers that are all kind of zigzag. But look at my shape, very loose. Roses are a little bit more defined. So sketch that in. Get my roses here. See how I'm holding my brush? I'm holding it kind of at the end, because if I hold it like this, I'm going to want to go very tight and I want to be loose. Okay, see how loose that is? I'm not going to worry about measuring because today we just have this little basket in here. Don't have the jar. That was a little more important. You get to see me work a little faster. And there's my line across that anchors it. See how loose that is? I'm not measuring it for proportion. Some of the proportions are wrong. This white blob of flowers here is a little bigger than mine, but no biggie. Okay, and then I'm gonna go from light to dark, I think in this case. The oil painter in me, man, dude, I just wanna carve out that background, but I know it will be prudent to get in some of those colors first and then use the background to define the shape. So I'm going to start with those roses. Those roses are calling to me. So I have a red color. It's kind of a peachy pink. How do we make peachy pink? Well, I have a red here. They call this red. It's more orange than anything. And then there's some pink. Let me get that in. I'm going to do a little wash. It's a little darker than I want it. Add a little more water. Just kind of pull that shape together. Okay, same thing here. I would like it a little more pink, so add a little more pink. Keep it loose. I may just let it dry like that. One thing you can do, which is kind of cool, I have some paper towel. I'm going to go in. If you pinch the towel to get kind of a straight edge, you can pull out little petals while it's wet and help kind of define those shapes a little bit. You can only do that while it's wet, so let's try that. Different approach. I can't tell you how many approaches there are for painting, right? Every teacher has a different approach. That's just one of them. As a teacher, I get to wear many hats because I get to try different things. All right, let's let those dry. Soften that a little bit. And let's get in some yellow. Here's some yellow paint. And it's more in shadow here. So do yellow and a little green. Is that crazy? Let's get some of that shadow in. And I'm going to go right up against this flower here. Now this is even more green, so let's add more green. Okay, leave it. See how loose I get to be? This is easier for me now because I'm more confident having just created something. You know, that kind of worked out. All right, white. Challenging, right? So what I think is there's a warmth for the flowers here on the left side and then a cool on the right. I'm going to do the warm first. I'm going to go light to dark. So I'm going to add a little yellow. That's orange, clearly. But let's just wash it out with some water. That's okay. Same thing here. Just going to fill in a warm color. Why? Well, I'll have a nice warm underpainting. And then I can add that cool blue shadow here. Let me get some of this, get my green leaves in, green and black. Maybe a little brown. Let's see. Now I hate that I went over on top of my pretty rose, so used a little water. Blur that edge a little bit. You can do that while it's wet. There, clean that up a little bit. And now I'm going to add a little dark here. There's a dark leaf on the right side. Let's go right off that page. All right. We'll see how it's kind of modular. I do part by part. I did flower by flower. I got a nice underpainting down. I'm not starting from nothing, right? Just blocking in some shapes, going from the big picture to the small. Get in my basket, which is a kind of a brown. I want to spend a little time just getting some of that shape in here. It's a hard shape. It gets a little darker on the right. Just a little detail. And it's all very wet. Put some of that across. Okay, it's kind of funny. So more complicated painting in a way. More to paint, less time. So you have to work a little faster. So I'm going to add some blue, get some of these, the cool side of the flowers in. Now what I'm doing is I don't want just a total wash. I want to show some flowers through there. So see what I did? I'm just kind of drawing some almost like little lines, scribbles. And I went a little too dark here. That's okay. Pull some off. But now I have a nice warmth underneath. There we go. And then on this side, it's a little green. Some of that shadow. Oop, too dark. If it's too dark, you just use a little more water. Now, my photo's all bleached out. Here, you can't see anything, so I'm just continuing some of those shapes. That's kind of nice. Add a little shadow here now that it's a little more dry. Okay, not bad. Really, really want to do those roses. But let me do some of these first. Really green center. I say that and I add brown. Mistake. If you see green, paint green. I don't know why. I thought it was a little brown would help. And then add some green on the side. Kind of starting with the center. So see how I went from a big picture, big shape, big blobs. Now I'm working my way up to detail. I remember this was hard when I did this in oils, this part of the painting. Add some water, spread that out a little bit. There we go. That's nice. I took some water and I'm kind of radiating my shape out from the center. I'll show you a close up here. That's nice. Loose too. Let me get a little darker green. Oop, too dark. It's a push and pull. You put something down, it's either right or wrong, usually a little bit of both, and then you adjust. Even in watercolor, you have water and you have a brush, and that's about it. Okay. Now those are greener flowers than maybe I wanted, but maybe I'll let them dry and add a little orange on top. A little bit of a wash. Now here, this dried kind of nicely, but I didn't define some of the petals as much as I wanted to. So now I'm going to mix up some black and brown, kind of come in and really get some petals here. See what that does? Just a couple petals goes a long way. And then this has almost some stripes going, some lines. Do those on top of that basket. And then there's a general shadow, so maybe I'll just add a little water here. go across. See that? Try to keep it simple. That's the thing. You're painting, life. That's very complicated. So the trick is try to keep it simple if you can. There's some shadow in here on the flowers. Down here. Just added a big old brush stroke. All right, let's see. 15 minutes. Let's do home stretch here. I'm going to add some black and some blue for that leaf. Get a nice shadow in there. Going to add some water and pull that shadow right across that leaf. Same thing here. Get that shadow and pull it right across. Okay, I'm closer than I think. I think I'm going to go in with some red and pink. Now, this is hard. The dark parts, you want to put in black, you want to put in blue, but it just kills the softness of the flower. It becomes too harsh. So I'm just going to go as dark red as I can with maybe let's do a little purple mixed in. So red and purple. So I'm thinking color to make it dark, not black. And then I'm just going to draw some of these little lines in here. Try to maybe find the dark center. Find some little shadows. Just on top, maybe add a little water. You don't want everything to be a line, a hard line. Add some shadow in there. There, that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that flower. Same thing here. Try to find the dark center. But that's important. Do that with color. I've ruined plenty of roses with just adding black or blue or too dark. A little more water mixed in. Those are okay. Not as good. I like this one a little bit more. Nice thing. Let it dry. Do another pass. You really have nothing to lose. If something's bothering you, fix it. Even if it means ruining it. Sounds counterintuitive, but you have nothing to lose to try it. Try to get it how you want it to be. Yeah, those are good. Those flowers are probably the best part. Okay. Let me get in that dark, very dark background. I have black and blue. I'm going to keep it kind of dry too, I think, meaning not a lot of water. I don't want it a trippy mess. This is just black on top. Oh, take your time. I'm talking to myself. Jim, take my time. And then I can kind of clean things up too. I can make that leaf a little more organic shape. And directly under the leaf, there's a nice shadow. And that shadow just pops that out into the third dimension here. Up here, it's a little grayer. So maybe I'll add a little more blue. Now that I have this, I have a nice dark on my brush. Let's get rid of it on here. I'll work my way up to that light. This is like a Jamie Wyeth Andrew Wyeth technique, more opaque watercolor. I'm even adding a little texture. Because why not? Let's add a little texture. It is a little textured. Okay, add a little more water. This kind of chaotic background, I'm hoping it helps when I pull that tape off. Cleans it up a little bit. Oop. I went right over my flowers here. I know it's called a mistake, but they happen. You just dab it a little. There we go. No biggie. Okay, let me add a little blue to my black. Remember I said it's cooler. Cool tends to recede. So if I do it a little grayer back here, the hope is that it goes into the background and my flowers that are very warm kind of pop out. Okay, it's a beautiful mess. Let me add a little brown here. I noticed that black. The problem with black is it dries so flat. Look at how rich that brown is compared. Okay, could take a good look. One thing I'm noticing is I want to add just a little definition on those green flowers right here. I wanted them to be warmer. So maybe I'll add a little orange and yellow. Just that little bit for those petals. And that's a little too much, you overdo it sometimes. You just soften. There. Not bad. Last thing, after all my talk about not killing those flowers, those roses with blue, there is just such a dark center here. Let me just take a little red and blue, just a little bit, just to find that center. Maybe a little water. Okay, let me peel the tape off. Hopefully this will give me my moment. I think we got a whole nother demo mixed in here just for this border. Got one kind of measured painting and then more of a speed painting. Not bad. Heavier approach. I was a little more comfortable with this with that dark background because of my my tendency to like oil paints and painting, really kind of heavy dark lines. Never too late to fix something. There we go. Okay. There's 1 to 1. Two for the price of one today, everybody.